Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast, and I am your host, Samuel. In this podcast, I interview top medical sales reps and leading medical sales executives across the entire country. And it doesn't matter what medical sales industry, from medical device to pharmaceutical to genetic testing to diagnostic lab, you name it. You will learn how to either break into the industry, be a top 5% performer within your role in sales, or climb the corporate ladder. Welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Samuel, and today we have with us another special guest, and he goes by the name of Trevor Boylston. Trevor is a senior supplier diversity specialist in Boston Scientific and an advocate for the LGBTQ community. He's an advocate for welcoming trans and binary workers into organizations, and he's doing things like this for Boston Scientific in a major way. This episode was an absolute joy to record. It was a wonderful interview, and we talk about a lot of amazing things that Trevor's been doing in that organization. His journey, his experiences are something I recommend everyone listen to. If you've ever had an interest in the LGBTQ community, then you absolutely have to listen to this episode. And if you've just been interested in what's happening in this space as far as diversity is concerned, then again, you have to listen to this episode. It was a true joy to do, and it just represents all the wonderful things we're doing with the Medical Sales Podcast. As always, we do our best to bring you guests that are innovating, pioneering, blazing new trails in the medical sales space, and I really do hope you enjoy this interview. Hey, Trevor, how are we doing today?
Good, Samuel. How are you doing?
I'm good. Why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Trevor Boylston. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the supplier diversity specialist for Boston Scientific. And I'm also an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community, especially when it comes to welcoming trans and non-binary workers into your company. I like to say I have a day job and a gay job, and I love it when they come together and I can talk about both like I'm going to do here today.
Fantastic. Well, first question, $1 million question. How did you get into your role? Take us back to when you were in college. Did you know that you could work for a med tech company like Boston Scientific? Take us back. How did it happen? What was going on?
Oh my goodness, no. This is not anything I ever saw myself doing. In fact, when I was in college, when I started college, I thought I was going to be a doctor. And then organic chemistry came around, and I quickly decided that was not a road that I was going to pursue.
Butt, man. It kicked everyone's butt, mine too.
Well, I passed, but it was enough to turn that off. But more important, in college, I was really struggling with my identity, my gender identity. I was so uncomfortable in my own skin that I really couldn't settle into anything. And I left college after 2 years, took an extended leave of absence to try and sort things out. At the time, I didn't have a way of explaining what was not sitting right. And it took me years to figure it out. And those years were spent job hopping. I managed a movie theater. I was a lifeguard. I was a corporate trainer. I was a security guard. I joined the military. I left the military. I worked as an EMT,
wow.
A bike messenger, customer service. It was really kind of just hopping all over the place. I couldn't settle into anything. Everything I did, parts of it I enjoyed. I was pretty good at it. I was good at building relationships, but never really at a deep level, and never really anything that felt fulfilling. I ended up, on a personal side, getting involved in what turned out to be a very abusive relationship, which cut me off from work for quite some time. And when I re-entered the job force, I had finally been able to come out to myself as trans, but having been cut off from the job force and really navigating those early days of transition, I didn't really know what to do. So I started temping. And that was good at the time. I didn't have to explain my transition to anyone. I spent 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there as my voice changed, as I started to grow a little bit of beard and lose the hair on top. No one questioned it because, 2 weeks, you're not going to get to know anybody. I ended up temping for a company in Cambridge. It was supposed to be a 4-day break covering someone's vacation for Christmas. And I ended up there for 8 years. It was not what I was expecting, but it was one of those, hey, we need some help on this floor. Can you come help here? We need help in shipping and receiving. Can you come help? We need help in accounts payable. Can you come help? Eventually, I landed a role in procurement as a buyer and a planner and a sourcing representative for the company. and really did really well with that. It was a lot of that relationship building with some of the data analytics and the transactional piece, and settled there really well for 8 years. Probably about a year in, it hit me that I had gone 3 days without thinking about my gender identity. And that was awesome. No one there knew me before my transition. They just accepted me at face value. At the time, it wasn't a company environment where I would have felt safe being out, wouldn't have felt supported being out, but it was a place where I could learn to be myself. Eventually, I realized I wanted more from my career. I wanted to advance. I wanted more strategic work, and started looking outside. Landed a wonderful opportunity at Boston Scientific, came in as a buyer in the endoscopy and urology units. I'm going to pause right there to say that what I'm sharing today is from my own perspective and not on behalf of Boston Scientific. And again, didn't plan to be out. I went in as myself. No one there knew me before my transition. So why shake things up? About 6 months after I started, someone that sat near me started telling transgender jokes, and it made me uncomfortable. And I started finding reasons to not be at my desk. I would take my laptop and go work from the cafeteria or from a huddle room. And my boss, I think at the time, was, shaking her head saying, I just hired this guy. He's never at his desk. What the heck? I mean, I know he's doing his work, but he's just never where he's supposed to be. Yeah. So that was really uncomfortable for me. And it got to a point where I ended up calling this individual into a conference room and saying, I know everybody laughs at these jokes and everybody rolls their eyes and no one's calling you out, but you don't know who around you is upset by these. You don't know who has trans family or who might be trans themselves. And I was really expecting him to just be a jerk back. I was not expecting much of a positive response. And he broke down, and he said he had a family member transitioning. He didn't know how to deal with that. He didn't know where to find resources to support. He said he felt like he was losing someone that he'd known all his life and had been very close to all his life, because he was afraid that they were going to become a different person. Mm. And that really struck me. I'd always thought that microaggressions, macroaggressions always came from a place of malice. And here I was seeing this person's point of view and hurting for him. And it struck me at the time. I ended up coming out to him on the spot saying, I'll tell you, I'm trans, ask me whatever you want to ask. I want to make sure that you're supported, that your family members supported, and that we can continue to have a good working relationship. Because up till then we had. We spent about 2 hours talking that day, and it changed the course of my career at Boston Scientific. Wow. After having that conversation with him, I realized that there's probably other people that need to hear that. I got very involved with our employee resource group for LGBT employees, eventually working my way up to the global lead position for that group. I was given the opportunity through engaging openly with that group to work on changing policies in the company, to work on changing our HR benefits policies to be more equitable for assisted reproduction for LGBT folks, which also benefited single women. I was able to work with our global teams to change the way our bathrooms are designed so that when we have new construction, a neutral restroom is constructed in the same block as the men's and women's rooms. So you're not having to go out on a loading dock or walk half a mile to get to a restroom that you feel safe accessing. Even with our facilities fitness center, they have a 5K on our campus every year. And the fitness center said, hey, we have a men's category and a women's category, but we have the ability to change. We can add more categories. So we added a new category for folks who are non-binary, and it's been great just to see the change, to empower other coworkers to come out and feel safe being out, to have the opportunity to engage with everyone across the company, from our sales teams, which we have wonderful sales representatives who are part of the LGBT community that hadn't felt seen until we were able to bring them in and say, yes, we see you. We want you to be a part of this group. We want to see, how we can support our sales force. And some of that is around language that we use in brochures. Are we using the right language to reach the community that we want to reach? Are we using language that is approachable? And it's been an incredible journey. The whole time I was working as a buyer still, until I was approached by the supplier diversity lead at the time, and they said, hey, there's this conference. It's a conference we go to try and work with LGBT-owned businesses for this program we call supplier diversity. Would you care to support it as the lead for this ERG? And I thought about it for half a second and said, yes, absolutely. I want that.
Right.
So I attended that conference and it was eye-opening. And I had no idea that supplier diversity was even something that was out there as a career. And it took me about 2 seconds to decide after that conference that this is what I want to do. So I spent the next several years supporting ad hoc, moving so it was 50% of my role, and finally transitioning into the full-time role last year. And it's incredible. I get to work with so many amazing communities, not just the LGBT community. We work with the U.S. Pan-Asian Chamber of Commerce, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, the U.S. Black Chambers, U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, WeBank. I'm sure I'm missing a few in there, but I love it. It's all about building those relationships. It's all about bridging those gaps between the needs of the company and the suppliers who can fill those needs. It's about innovation, and dealing with the sales reps for all these companies has given me a lot of appreciation for how hard sales reps out there are working on a daily basis to get in front of the right people. So having a program where you can learn from anyone you can, you find those mentors and use those programs like the medical sales program here to get in front of these companies and learn all you can, because there are so many people out there with so much experience, and it is just a wealth of knowledge. So take advantage of it where you can.
That is awesome. That is awesome, Trevor. Let's go back a little bit. What exactly does your role? You told us a little bit about what you do as a sourcing supplier, but give us the details. What's the sole responsibility that you're responsible for, and what does that look like on a day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for a company that's a federal contractor. We have sales that go into the VA hospital system. And as such, we're required to maintain a small and diverse supplier program to meet the Small Business Administration's requirements. Aside from that, it's a good business practice, innovation, diverse thought. Just like you want your workforce to be diverse, you want your supplier base to be diverse as well. They bring such a wealth of innovation and value to the company. So on a day-to-day basis, it's a lot of relationship building. It's a lot of getting to know the suppliers that are out there and finding good fits internally with stakeholders. It's trying to match a need that's open in the company with a vendor that can fill that need. And that's done through a series of attending conferences for the national group organizations, through the one-on-one matchmaking, business matchmaking. Think of it like speed dating for business, where we meet a host of vendors over the course of a day. It's done through industry peer group support, sharing best practices with my peers. And it's done through mentorship. And we have the opportunity to mentor businesses, entrepreneurs who are in small and diverse organizations who are trying to advance their business. So a lot of it is facilitating those matches internally, making sure they're connected with professionals who can help them grow their business, people who can help them assess their weaknesses, their needs, their business pitch, so they can fine tune that pitch when they walk in and say, this is who I am, this is what I sell, this is why you need it. So there's a lot of just that one-on-one work, a lot of advocacy work, understanding what laws are affecting different communities these days, understanding where a fast no might be more of a mercy to a business than a long drawn out maybe. And no is not an easy word to say. And as sales reps, no is never a no. You know that. So it's a lot of that work. It's a lot of detailed work, collecting data as well. So we want to know how much we're spending with diverse businesses. We want to know how much our prime suppliers are spending with their diverse businesses. And we like to take a look at that data and see what impacts it has on the communities. For example, we know that spend of about 13 million creates X number of jobs in communities where these diverse businesses operate. It improves health outcomes. It improves college attendance. There's just a wealth of benefits to the environmental, social, and governance aspect of a business when you are doing business with diverse businesses. So that's a tongue twister right there. So a lot of it is answering emails, it's getting on phone calls, it's one-on-one conversations like this one on Zoom, and finding champions in the company that are not afraid to take a risk on a business that they haven't worked with yet. It's understanding when we can push and when we have to back off. It's advocating for policies that make a more equitable playing field for small and diverse businesses. For example, expedited payment terms to help with cash flow for small businesses is a big one, especially coming out of the pandemic. We know that access to capital in small and diverse businesses, especially at that startup phase, is so critical. And if you have a large company that has standard payment terms that are really, really long, then that cash flow is going to be an issue to doing business. And we want to make sure that those barriers are removed. So a lot of it, as I said, it's relationship building. And I think from a sales standpoint, you can appreciate that, right? You're out there to build those relationships. And this is, I'm the guy on the other side of that page. So it's been great. I've learned so much. I've developed so much empathy and respect, and just, it's been an incredible journey in supplier diversity. And I'm just dipping my toes in the beginning of a career that I hope is decades long in this field.
Hey, more power to you. Absolutely. And we can't wait to see your continued progress. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more personal aspect of things. Talk a little bit about when you kind of touched on it earlier, but share with us again, when do you know that you wanted to go through an actual transition, and what was that experience like?
Sure. So to take that back, when I share my story, I always start with, once upon a time in a land far, far away, there was a baby born, and the doctor held the baby up and said, "Congratulations, it's a girl." Now, we all make mistakes. So that was South Carolina in the 70s. I was fortunate to grow up in Massachusetts in the 80s. And it was great. The neighborhood we moved into, all the other kids that were my age were boys too. So we did all the things that boys do. We climbed over fences, we ran through mud puddles, we played in the tide pools, all the stuff that kids get in trouble for. So one day we were cutting through a yard that we probably shouldn't have been cutting through, climbing over a fence that we definitely shouldn't have been climbing over. And I slipped at the top of the fence. And the first words out of my mouth at about 7 years old were, "Ow, my balls." And one of the other little kids looked at me and he said, "You're a girl. You don't have balls." Mm-hmm. And it was really the first time in my life that I realized that I knew I was a boy, but no one else around me knew. No one else could understand that. It started fights with my mom on Sundays when she wanted me to wear a dress to go to church. And it started feeling isolated at school when I didn't want to play with the girls, but I wasn't really welcome to play with the boys anymore. I turned into the smart kid that did their homework early and didn't have a lot of friends. In 7th grade, the friends that I did have, and I earned the nickname the Nerd Herd. It was given to us by the teachers, and it stuck. So it was a little lonely. I can remember the first time I felt gender dysphoria truly as a physical sensation. I was 13. It was my 13th birthday. My mother took me to get my hair cut. Don't have to worry about that anymore. And the hairstylist at the time found out it was my birthday and gave me the gift of a manicure. And for a 13-year-old in the early 90s, late 80s, that was really nice. It was really generous. Wasn't something that the other kids were getting. I hated every single second of it. I couldn't wait to get out that door and peel the paint off my nails. I felt dizzy, nauseous, angry, and so guilty because I knew this was kind. I knew this was so nice, and I didn't understand. I didn't have the words to explain why this was so upsetting. I can still remember the shade of nail polish. It was the same shade that my mother wore, that her mother wore, that my grandmother wore, that her sisters wore. It was because we all went to the same hairstylist because that's the way things worked. And that started really being uncomfortable with my body. It started periods of showering at night with the lights off so I wouldn't have to acknowledge what my body was doing as I went through puberty. It was really, really upsetting. But I still didn't have the language for it. We didn't have Google. We didn't have positive representation of trans people in the media on TV. If we did see someone that was trans, it was in a crime drama, and they were either a prostitute or a gotcha plot device. And it was just no positive representation. So I didn't have the language. I didn't know how to explain this. I didn't know if my family would accept it. I thought when I left high school that things would be better, that I could just be somewhere else. And it was the place that was the problem, not something inside of me. So left for college, couldn't settle into anything there. It was the same thing. I was depressed. I was just isolated from more resources. So it was not a good environment. We touched on what it was like when I left college, job hopping. What we didn't touch on is I came out as a lesbian, admitted that I was attracted to women at the time. My family was okay with that. I thought, this is as far as it needs to go. I don't need to acknowledge this other part of me that is still not quite right. And for a while, that was okay, but I still was holding people at arm's length. I wasn't really developing those deep relationships with people. And it really took getting out of that abusive relationship where my choices were down to suicide or starting over. I didn't have the energy to hide who I was anymore. Yeah. And the night that relationship ended, it ended with me bloody on the floor thinking, well, there's enough pills in the cabinet in the bathroom. When I have the energy to get up, this will be it. I won't have to worry about it anymore. But I fell asleep on that floor and I woke up the next day with enough energy to go one more day. Called my mom, came out to my family. It was a little rougher this time around. My mother was supportive right from the start. Had some family that took some time to come around. First piece of advice I got from my mom when I came out as trans was, well, if you're going to be a straight man, you need to learn to talk about sports. So she sent me off to the store to buy a Red Sox shirt and a Bruins shirt and a Celtics shirt and a Patriots shirt. I couldn't have told you anything about any of those teams, but that was my wardrobe to start. And it took a long time for me to realize that my mom had to go through a grieving process. She had to let go of the daughter that she thought she had to make room for the son that she does have. And looking back on it, we're coming up on almost 20 years of transition. I transitioned at the age of 27. I'll be 45 this year. It was a struggle for her, but she never let that on. She always showed support. My brother, he was good with it. We like to say he's got the emotional depth of a spatula. His whole processing was, my sister's going to California and she's coming back, my brother, which fine, that works. That works for me. I knew right away, as soon as I came out, and got into therapy, because the first steps to getting gender transition care was therapy, which was probably the best thing for me at the time. I really used it to deal with coming out of that abusive relationship, to be a whole person again, to address some of the depression that was around that. And it was pretty early on that it was clear that my gender identity was male and that it was persistent, and it had been for many years. I just hadn't acknowledged it. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted that therapist support for moving forward with medical transition. At the time, the Harry Benjamin Standards of Care required a letter from a certified mental health professional saying that the person was of sound mind to make these decisions. Pretty much similar to what you see today, although laws across the country are doing their best to change that, not in a positive way. Barriers to care are very real right now. So therapy for several months before I was able to access hormone therapy. The endocrinologist that provided that hormone therapy saw adult patients one day a month out of a spare room in another clinic, because his practice was pediatrics. Okay. So started on hormone therapy, got scheduled for mastectomy, which was the first surgery that I would have to affirm my gender. And man, what a load off my chest, pun intended, fully intended there. I was binding at the time, which is very uncomfortable. It can be dangerous. Was lucky enough to be in a position of privilege and employed where I was able to purchase binding garments that were meant for surgical binding. A lot of people who don't have access to those will use things like duct tape or ace bandages, which can cause some really long-term problems with breathing, with damage to your tissue around your ribs and your lungs. And so I was lucky enough to be able to afford and have access to the care that I needed and the material that I needed at the early part of my transition. Insurance paid for none of it at that point. I was paying everything out of pocket. The transition surgeon that I saw for my top surgery, it's called mastectomy, would be called top surgery, was in California at the time. So that involved flying out to California, putting myself up for 2 weeks, and paying for the surgeon and the fees out of pocket to the excess of $10,000, which pretty wiped out the savings that I had, and it was life-saving. Honestly, I know people think of it as cosmetic or not necessary. It was necessary to be affirmed as the person I am.
Absolutely. I mean, it impacts your whole sense of being, I'm sure.
Absolutely. The way you present yourself to the world, the way you were read by the world. It also is the first step for me at the time to change my legal documentation. And we all know how important ID is in this world. If you are presenting an ID that doesn't align with your appearance, everything from the TSA to a routine traffic stop to buying liquor. It's a world where your paperwork has to match who you are, or you are in a world of hurt. So those first steps, getting a passport that had my right name on it, getting after legal name change and social security name change, getting a driver's license that had a picture that looked like me, that had my name and my gender marker on it correctly. South Carolina, at the time, they didn't want to change my birth certificate, and I needed that to get my driver's license, so had to hire a lawyer, more costs out of pocket. And it adds up. And again, I'm gonna reaffirm here, from the place of privilege where I stood for that, I was able to have the family support, so I wasn't homeless. I was able to be employed because honestly, I'm a white man, and employment, I walked into that temp agency and they hired me on the spot. That was what kickstarted this whole thing, because I had the access that so many other people don't have. There's so many biases in employment. You see a lot of trans folks who go underemployed, who, especially trans women, they have to turn to sex work to support themselves just because they don't have options out there, if they don't have the support. So when you talk about people who are resilient and who have an entrepreneurial spirit and who can really develop relationships, you want to look at those trans women who have come out of that sex worker world, who have been able to pull themselves out and advance themselves into careers. They are amazing people, and more power to everyone that's able to lift themselves out of that place that I never had to go.
I had a question for you.
Sure.
And I want you to correct me if I don't say this the right way. Is when you say transition, is there a completion of transition, or is it just transition and it's going to be what it's going to be?
That is a fantastic question. Thank you for asking. You asked it just the right way. Transition is going to look different for everybody. There are people who will identify as trans without ever taking any medical steps to transition. There are people who would identify as gender fluid or gender non-binary that may take some steps, but not all steps that are available to them. For me, I always had an end goal in sight, and it's taken almost 2 decades to almost be at that end goal. For most people, what transition means is getting to a point where you're comfortable with the way your body and your mind align. And there's no right way to transition. There is no one course of action. There's no one surgery that does it all. There's no one medical step that does it all. So it's really dependent on the person and what their care team decides is right for them. Some people are not tolerant of the hormone therapy. They can't take them. There are some people that are, for one reason or another, unable to go through surgical procedures, whether they don't have the finances or the support network to do so. It really means something different to everybody. But for me, I had a clear end goal in sight. If you look at the scale of female to male, and people fall on a spectrum somewhere in there, I find myself at the far end of male. I am as masculine as I can be, I think, getting there. A few more surgeries, I think, knock on wood, just one more to go, and I'll have reached what I would consider the end of my transition.
Wow. Now, and again, educate me here. I'm assuming that when you get to that stage where you can say, I have completely transitioned from my definition, that's like monumental. Let's throw a party. Oh my gosh. Or is it more like, no, this is just who I am, and I'm happy that I've arrived, and everything continues as normal?
That's a great question. For me, for a long time, I thought the top surgery and hormones was enough. And just because the additional surgeries were so expensive and healthcare wasn't covering them at the time. So I kind of put it like out of my head. And then dysphoria crept back in, and there were some issues around, I still had a uterus and ovaries, and the maintenance that comes along with those yearly pap smears. I was so dysphoric around having that procedure done, but it was necessary because the organs are still there. You still have to care for them. So I made the decision to have a hysterectomy. So okay, great. That's gone now. Don't have to think about that. And then the dysphoria crept back in. It's like, I've thought about this surgery for so many years. I put it out of my head as something that was impossible. But now I have a wonderful, supportive family and in-laws who are there for us. My mother's there for us, my wife, my child. I'm working for a company that understands that this is something that is important and has the benefits that would support me going through this procedure. So I actually reached out to our medical sales team, our wonderful medical sales team, and said, hey, you work with these surgeons day in and day out for other reasons. Who would you send someone to if they were going through this procedure? And they recommended a surgeon in New York. And I made the first call in June. It took 6 months to get the consult. And then 18 months after that consult was booked for the first surgery. And I thought I was prepared mentally for it, for just being ready for it to be there. But when they wheeled me into the recovery room and I saw my reflection in the ceiling for the first time, it was the first time in my life, in 44 years of my life, that I looked in a mirror and saw a whole person. And I started crying. It was just, I still get choked up thinking about it. Just a little more whole every day. And now being able to look in a mirror and see a whole person is, it's an amazing feeling.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't trade that for anything.
One thing I love about your story is you keep highlighting how much support you had. And you didn't have support from everyone, but you had enough support that it really allowed you to explore, what do I really want? What will make me feel whole? And what's the soundest and safest way to get there? And
absolutely.
It's almost like you created a blueprint. I'm curious, for those that are listening that might be in the same position you were at one point, what are the resources they can turn to truly get support and even have, the type of experience that you were able to create for yourself?
That's a great question. And today that answer is going to look very different than it will tomorrow. There are some wonderful resources out there. NYU Langone has a gender-affirming care resources. It's really going to depend on where you live and what care you're able to access and how old you are. Right now, there are laws sweeping the country that are restricting gender-affirming care for minors. And gender-affirming care for minors does not mean surgery. Gender-affirming care for minors means social transition. It means a different haircut, different clothing, different name. It means at the time of puberty, the ability to access drugs that would put a pause on puberty, that are reversible, that have been used for decades to treat cisgender children who hit early puberty. But state after state, we're seeing those procedures banned. And some states are as extreme. The Attorney General of Missouri, for example, just issued an emergency order saying that no care can be received until other issues have been cleared up. For example, depression. If you are depressed, you cannot also receive gender-affirming care. Well, for a lot of folks, that depression is caused by not being able to access that gender-affirming care.
Right.
So when you're looking out there for resources, if you're in the New England area, the Mass Trans Political Coalition is a great resource. PFLAG will have great resources. On a national level, the Transgender Center for Equality, they do a lot of advocacy work. Google is a thing now, and it's very helpful to look up local resources. If you're in a pinch, find me on LinkedIn or at trevorboylston.com. You're welcome to reach out to me, and I can try to help you find something in your area as well. Your companies, if you are working already, you probably have an employee assistance program that probably has some of that information embedded in it. Look for your affirming health centers like Fenway Health in Massachusetts or Callan Lord in New York. They have a lot of resources out there. And look for states that are really trying to drive sanctuaries for bodily autonomy care is really what it is. You're looking at your California, your Colorado, your Minnesota, your Massachusetts. Those are the states that are safe right now for you to access care and will have the resources to point you in the right direction.
Excellent. Well, Trevor, this has been fascinating. If you can share just a little bit more with us. Family, do you have a family? I mean, as in like children or planning to have children or a husband, wife? You share with us.
Sure. So I identify as a straight man. I have a wife. She did not know I was trans when we met. She's a wonderful person who works in supply chain. Together we have one child. She's 3, and she is the absolute light of my life. She is sassy and bold and opinionated and artistic. And we have a dog in the family too, our four-legged baby. And it's wonderful. I'm very lucky to have this structure in my family. Eventually would like to grow our family. I hope we grow our family. Does take some medical intervention for that. So we are always
So
keeping an eye on that.
I'm going to ask, because I know a bunch of people are thinking it. So now technology has moved as far along that you could have gender-affirming surgery, be a straight man, and actually produce. No, not quite. Okay.
No, not quite. I wish that was the case. We haven't quite gotten there.
What can be done?
Wonderful medical intervention, assisted reproduction technology, IVF, IUI. There's some wonderful centers out there. Fenway Health, I'm going to call out, and full disclosure, I did serve on the board of Fenway Health for a few years, but I've been a patient there for over a decade, receiving care, and they have a program that specifically works with lesbian and trans couples who are trying to conceive. So we were very lucky to be able to access a program where they knew which boxes to check off for us for our insurance purposes, and there were no questions about having to prove that we had been trying for so many months before being declared infertile, which is, you look at some of the questionnaires in these places and they go through this whole list of answering questions that are not applicable. And then you get to the very last question and it asks if they're same sex or trans partners. It's like, if you ask that question first, you would save yourself a lot of time going through this questionnaire. So it's interesting to navigate that world, but we're very lucky to have in Massachusetts the resources that we have here.
That is amazing. That is so amazing. Trevor, you have created quite the life, to go through what you went through, be able to be an advocate, have so much support, and then go on to create a family that just continues to spread the message and have even more support. You really have set the blueprint. You really have. Or a blueprint.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah. That is fantastic. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I think for anyone listening out there, I think we've definitely been educated and we definitely know how important it is to have advocacy in this space.
Absolutely.
One thing I want to do with you is have a lightning round where you have less than 10 seconds to answer a series of questions.
Let's go.
All right. So Trevor, in the last 6 months, what's the best book you've read?
I just finished listening to the Stormlight Archives book 4, Rhythm of War. And I love sci-fi fantasy, so that's top of my list right now.
Rhythm of War. I mean, is there any more known science fiction that we can kind of relate that to?
If you've listened to any of the Wheel of Time series from Robert Jordan or Game of Thrones, it's not quite as violent as Game of Thrones, but it's similar vein. Very cool. I'll have to check it out. All right. And then what is the best movie or TV show you've seen in the last 6 months? Oh gosh, this is from a parent of a 3-year-old. We've been watching a lot of Bluey, and it's unbelievably relevant to parenting. It's great. Australian series about cattle dogs and their 2 kids. It's wonderful. Never heard of it, but I'll have to check that out as well. All right, and then what's the best meal you've had in the last 6 months? Any meal that was not cooked by me. Gosh, that's a tough one. It can be a restaurant too. Honestly, I've been recovering from surgery since November. There was a lot of just takeout over that period of time. So, you know what? I'm going to say the Christmas dinner with my whole family here. They came here and everyone else cooked, so I didn't have to make anything other than the roast beef. And that was wonderful. My mother makes an amazing broccoli casserole. And my mother-in-law makes amazing cheesy potatoes. So I think between the two of them, that was probably my favorite meal, just because everyone was together. That is awesome. And then lastly, what's the best experience you've had in the last 6 months? The best experience in the last 6 months, it's when I picked my daughter up from daycare and she sees me and she yells, "Daddy!" And she goes running across the daycare and jumps into my arms. That is just the best feeling. So recovering enough from surgery so that she can jump into my arms and I can pick her up now and give her a big hug. Amen to that. Trevor, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for the time with us. We can't wait to see your continued progress and advocacy in this space. And thank you for being on the Medical Sales Podcast. Well, thank you for having me. It's a wonderful organization, and I look forward to seeing what your wonderful mentees do out in the world.
And that was Trevor Boylston. Fascinating episode. We got to listen to a fascinating individual doing fascinating things. It's episodes like this that remind me on why the Medical Sales Podcast is so important. The whole point of the podcast is to shed light on an industry that people now know about, but people are very unclear about the inner workings and all that it entails. And then, of course, to provide an avenue for people that want to get involved, get into a position themselves, give them a true, solid way to get there with our program, the Medical Sales Career Builder. But to bring a voice like Trevor's to a massive audience, it's awesome. And it's why we do this here at the Medical Sales Podcast. We want to shed light on every facet of medical sales, not just the differences within medical sales, whether it be pharmaceutical or medical device, but on the individuals that are in these positions and the different types of individuals that are in these positions. And that's exactly what we're doing. So it's just great to be able to share this with you all. So, of course, if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, then you already know what I'm going to say now. But I'm going to say it again because we believe in it so strongly and we want you to be a part of it if that's what you want to do. Medical sales is an awesome field. You're impacting patients' lives. You're working with some of the smartest individuals on the planet, and you're truly invited to use everything you know how to do to make something happen. And that's the same kind of opportunity we want to create for you with the Medical Sales Career Builder. Some of you might be listening and you've been wishing you could be in a medical sales position, but you have no idea where to start. Or you might be listening and you've been applying, you're on the 100th application and nothing, crickets. Or you've been getting interviews and you just are not being selected and you keep being told it's because of your lack of sales experience or your lack of medical experience or your lack of experience. We've heard it all. But I'm here to share with you that if you really want to be in this industry and you're a professional and you're ready to do what it takes to make some things happen, then you don't need sales experience. You don't need medical experience. You don't need any of the things that they've been telling you. What you need is a resource that can give you all the tools that you actually need to get the job. And that's what we can do with the Medical Sales Career Builder. One thing I want to highlight, sales experience is often recommended for people that want to get into these careers, not because you have to have sales experience to get this career, but because they're hoping that if you take a sales job and you hate it, then you'll be quickly turned away from ever coming near this career. That's really what the angle is. Sales, it's the world of no's and yeses. And a true sales professional is always looking for a way to turn that no into a yes. But what that means is your daily experience can be a lot of rejection. And the reality is some people just aren't built to experience that much rejection between an 8 and 5, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. period. They're not built to handle that much rejection in such a short amount of time. On the other side of that token, some people thrive on doing just that. Now, if you want to be in medical sales, then being able to handle rejection is going to serve you well. However, medical sales is also nuanced because there are opportunities that don't really take on traditional selling. For example, a clinical specialist, where your expertise is helping the provider, aka medical professional, utilize whatever it is you're selling. That's much less about a rejection and much more about your competency in communicating with someone and your competency in understanding the service or product that you're helping this provider utilize. So again, if you want to enter medical sales, whether you're the hardcore sales professional that can handle rejection any time of day, or the not so hardcore sales professional that would love to use your expertise and intelligence to help a provider utilize the product or service to the best of their ability, we believe that there's a place for you within the medical sales realm. And that's what we're helping people find. And that's what we're helping people get into, ultimately to go and thrive in. So again, If you want to be in medical sales, visit evolveyoursuccess.com and let's have a conversation. Make sure you tune in next week for another episode of the Medical Sales Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And remember, I have a couple programs that show you exactly how to break into the medical sales industry, become a top-performing medical sales professional, and also how to masterfully navigate your career to executive level leadership. Check out these programs and learn more at evolveyoursuccess.com. Stay tuned for more awesome content with amazing interviews.